I'd like to introduce our next speaker. We want to make sure we stay on time. So we're going to move directly into the next speaker, who is Miss Shannon Laguerre Maingrette, right? Maingrette, right. So there we go. Sorry. So I met her before she was married. I was an intern in law school for her when she was at FIAC. Currently, she is a partner at Spar and Bernstein in New York. She currently specializes in asylum withholding. Let me set the stage so when she's giving these jewels, you understand where she's coming from, right? So she specializes in asylum, withholding of removal, Convention Against Torture, criminal immigration, deportation, defense, and federal court litigation. She has an impressive history of winning complex legal cases at her current position, as well as her previous workplace in Florida at the Immigrant Advocacy Center, where I interned and met her in Florida, in Miami. Oh, you too? Go ahead. As an immigrant rights advocate, Shannon delved into the complexities of migration and worked on protecting human trafficking victims, as well as persons forced into sexual slavery. She's assisted in the drafting, legislation here, assisted in the drafting of a bill which became Florida statute, I'm not going to read the number, you can read it yourself, establishing trafficking of people into sexual slavery as a crime, revising the RICO laws to also include sex trafficking. She then gained in-depth, first-hand experience in addressing the needs of asylum seekers by representing immigrants fleeing Haiti, Cuba, China, in boats as they arrived in the shores of Miami, Florida. So I read this for the sake of those of you that are online and might not have it. It is digital. Check our website. I'll come back and let you know where you can find the program to read the rest of the bios. Those of you that have your program that are here with us, you can continue to read it. Please, without further ado, Shannon, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Karen. Gosh, I have to follow you. I told you that before. I mean, you were just amazing. So again, chapeau bas to you. So another applause. So again, my name is Shannon Laguerre Maingrette. There are many of you that I see out there that I know. Today, we're going to talk about Immigration 101. My job today is to talk about the evolution of the immigration laws and how it impacts Haitians and their journey here to the U.S. So next slide. And so basically we're going to be talking about the immigration policies affecting Haiti and places for advocacy. I think it's really important for us to understand the history so we can basically understand how we can move forward and be better advocates. Next slide, please. So I've been practicing immigration law almost 20 years, I can't believe it. Started teaching law also, and I remember this. I remember this big symbol, of course, the Statue of Liberty, going all the way back to 4th grade, and I remember this poem. This poem really motivated me to be where I am today. When we read this poem, it really, to me, talks about the ideals and principles of immigration. And probably some of you have already heard it, but I definitely want to just explain how important it is for me. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shores. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Next slide, please. So, you look at this and you really think about the history of immigration. People that were coming here in the early years when this country started basically were fleeing from persecution. These were people that were basically needed to be protected, and that is what immigration is about. Immigration is protecting those that have been persecuted, protecting those that have been that are vulnerable. And basically, let's think about it. Let's all be real about this. Immigration is about having a better life. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? And so when you see this, you know, because it's been sad, to be quite frank with you, because I've had some of, you know, my brothers and sisters talk about the fact that this makes them embarrassed, right? There's been some criticism of what's going on. And I think we've all heard that. But the reality is that that could be us. That probably once was us, our families, our ancestors. And that is why it is really important to understand immigration. That is why it's really important to understand the journey of Haitians and how it began. Next slide, please. You know, my husband and I went back and forth about this slide. I thought it was really important to talk about because, you know, we always talk about Haiti becoming the first free Black republic. We all know that, right? But I think what's interesting, especially for our children, is for people to understand that it was a haven for immigration, right? You had people going back to, you know, Haiti, immigrating over there, enslaved people that were here in the United States who were like, you know what, I've had enough of this, right? When basically when they revolted and basically here we are now a free Black republic, you now had Christophe, Henry Christophe and Jean-Jacques Dessalines indicating, you know what, come here to Haiti. You're not going to be oppressed here. You're free in this country. And so you had people leaving the United States to go to Haiti. You had them leaving other countries to go to Haiti. When Jewish were basically being persecuted and fleeing from the Holocaust, guess where they went? To Haiti, right? When Arabs needed to basically immigrate, they went to Haiti. And look what's happening now. Chinese, Germans went to Haiti and basically progressed. They immigrated there and basically progressed in businesses. And this is really important because even though, you know, we know what's going on now, but I think it's really important to know our history and to understand this is where we were. And as much as we talk about basically our power, and I think it's really, really important, I mean, the whole premise is igniting our power, but trying to ignite our power here and finding a way to go back to, you know, this time. You know, I love representing clients from countries with the visa waiver program. Basically, not a lot of people are immigrating from those countries, so they're allowed to come in here. You know, I want to see that for Haiti. And us really talking about that, how we can get to that position where people are comfortable in the country, in Haiti. And it looks like, you know, grim now, but I think it is something that we need to sit and talk about. Next slide, please. So first large-scale migration out of Haiti was actually during the 1700s when the slaves revolted. And so the French slave owners said, okay, it looks like we have a problem, and actually left with their slaves. And they came to the United States. And where did they actually settle? Louisiana, New Orleans, New York, Chicago, right? And so these were the places that they came to, and that really was one of the migrations that started. Next slide, please. The second wave of migration was from 1915 to 1934. Not coming here to the United States, but you had Haitians that basically decided that they needed to leave the country. The US at that particular time, this was as a result of the assassination of Villebrun Sam, the president of Haiti at that time, and Woodrow Wilson, who was the president, indicated, you know, there's business interest in Haiti, and I need to protect it. Also understood that at this particular time, that they did not want any bad influences in Haiti. And they didn't want any kind of radicalism in Haiti. So they sent their Marines over, and Haitians felt terrorized and left, you know, Haiti and went to Cuba and Dominican Republic. And that's when you really begin to see the backlash against Haitians. That's when you really begin to see the hatred, you know, when they started to go to Dominican Republic and Cuba. Next slide, please. So Haitian migration to the U.S. begins with the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. That's when, there was legislation that really attracted Haitians, gave them an opportunity to be able to come to the United States. And the reason why, if you think about it, is that that's during the Vietnam War, right? Vietnam War is going on, and at this particular time, people didn't realize that it was going to go on for so long, And at that point, what happened? We're losing workers. We're losing skilled workers, we're losing unskilled workers. And so at that time, they said, you know what, you can secure a visa, come to the United States, and that's when the brain drain really started to happen out of Haiti. You had doctors, you had lawyers, you had engineers, you had people who were tailors and seamstress actually leaving Haiti to come here and start their lives. And some of us probably have family members that left during that time in the 60s. Pardon? Well, you had Duvalier, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. So basically, at this particular time, with the Hart-Celler Act, that was really where people were coming in. Next slide.
Can you also just tie that? So political need can create an opportunity.
Right, and so basically, and just to go back to the slide. And so if you look at this, this was really, there was a need right now, right? We needed workers here in the United States. And this was where you basically start to see this migration. There's this need coming in, there's a need for workers. And at this point, basically the opportunity becomes, it's an opportunity for Haitians to come here. I hope I put it in for you. Any questions?
There was
and we're about to get to that. You're like ready. She's like, let me tell you. Yeah, it's right there. wait, I'm going to get to that because it was in the 60s. I got it. But
They took advantage of it.
Oh, they took advantage of it. And, thank you. So, yes, of course, absolutely, there was Duvalier. Absolutely, in the 60s. But the reality of the situation is that you had the people that were able to leave, the people that were able to secure the visas to come here were basically, yes, escaping Duvalier. But the people basically that started to come in on boats, and that's when there was an influx, right? In the 1960s that you're talking about, I agree with you 100%. Duvalier definitely played a role in it, and we're going to talk about that. The policies, that the U.S. had as a result of Duvalier. But absolutely, you had Haitians in the 60s that were leaving as a result of that act, right? The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. When you start to see a steady influx of Haitians coming into the United States is really in the 70s, in December of 1972, when that first boat came in. And so what's important is, because I really wanted to talk about the policy implications of that, is that you had Haitians coming in, and go to the next slide because I think it's really important for us to look at that. That's all you saw, right? Pictures like this, Haitians coming in, the 70s, the 80s, that's all you saw. But Haitians weren't the only people coming in on boats. You had the Cubans. And the reason, the difference, really, is that Haitians, you had Papa Doc, which, to address your point, and the Duvaliers, the U.S. made a determination that the Haitians coming in were economic or migrants, that they were fleeing from persecution, and that the Cubans coming in on boats were fleeing from persecution. And the reason why, of course, is communism. You had Papa Doc and Baby Doc, both Duvaliers, being anti-communist. And of course, we all know that Castro was, pro-communist. And so the US did not want to offend the Duvaliers by indicating that, hey, we are going to determine that you are political refugees, because that's going to offend, right, the Duvaliers. They basically are in alignment with the policy of the US at this particular time. So you had Haitians coming in, with cases, just like you were talking about, terror, they were terrorized, and they were turned back. In 1981, you have President Reagan instituting for the first time a detention policy in order to prevent Haitians coming in. And even giving you almost like the sense that, hey, these individuals, Haitians coming in, have AIDS, and that's part of our reason for trying to intercept them before they even get to land. Next slide, please. So Karen earlier was talking about what I know as HRIFA, Haitian Refugee Immigration Fairness Act of 1998. This is really, really important because, again, going back to the 70s, to the 80s, when Haitians are basically routinely being denied asylum. They're making their credible claims, they're being denied asylum, and a lot of them were being returned back. Those that remained here, President Clinton came in, and you have Congress, just like Karen said before, who's in charge? Congress is in charge of the immigration laws. They're the ones who basically are responsible for making those laws. And Congress basically at that point understood that we had all these refugees here from Haiti. You had an overwhelming number of Haitians that were here from the 1980s. And how do you help these individuals? And that's how HRIFA came about. HRIFA basically assisted, just like we were talking about, it was advocates who really fought for HRIFA and made sure that you had so many people, so many Haitians that would be eligible to adjust status. Many times I used to represent them in court because there were issues that they had, but nevertheless, it was such a great opportunity to be able to see that there was an acknowledgement of basically the errors of our ways, because the term itself, Haitian Refugee Immigration Fairness Act, they are categorizing these individuals that they initially said did not have asylum claims, were not refugees, as refugees in 1998. I do want to talk about the Violence Against Women Act, because even though it's not for Haitians directly, it wasn't created for them directly, but a lot of Haitians actually benefited from the Violence Against Women Act of 1994. Many Haitians that we represented, and not only Haitian women, but Haitian men too, and Haitian children, right? So it's really important to look at these laws that came out during this time and how it helped the Haitian community. We all know about temporary protected status, but of course we need to talk about it. 2010 was as a result of the devastating earthquake that happened. And then 2021, as a result of the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse, you have this being instituted. And I think if people have questions, you can ask me, because I think people pretty much know what's going on with TPS. The migrants that are coming in now, I have so many families calling me, and they're not eligible for TPS at this point because they came in after that crucial date of July 29th. But I do want to talk about the Haitian Family Reunification Parole Program. Not many people know about it. This was instituted in 2014, and there are people like mothers who petition for their adult children in Haiti. You have siblings who are petitioning for their siblings in Haiti, sitting in Haiti, and those programs, those visas take a long time. You're 10 years, sometimes longer if it's a sibling, right? It's now going almost on 20 years for siblings. And the Haitian Family Reunification Parole Program, basically that was instituted, said, if it's almost 2 years and you're still waiting, instead of waiting in Haiti for that interview in Port-au-Prince, we're gonna bring you here. We're gonna bring you here, we're gonna parole you into the United States. We're gonna give you the esteemed work permit to be able to work here, which is amazing. And at that point, you can get your green card here. You don't have to go back home. And again, always keep in mind that immigration is also about family unification. It's about keeping the families together. This program was going to be terminated under Trump. And recently, they decided to keep it. And I think it's such a great thing, because I don't know how many clients I have that have really benefited from this program, to be able to come to this country and to be with their loved ones without having to wait in what's going on in Haiti at this point. And so I think this is a really great program, and it really goes to talk about the importance of us working together as advocates for these kind of programs. Just like Karen was saying before, you have these organizations that are working together and basically trying to make sure that these continue these programs, and Haitian Family Reunification Parole Program was one of them. Okay, I'm sorry, just go back. Just wanted to talk about the executive orders that happened under the Obama administration and Trump administration. People were very frustrated that Congress was not making enough laws to really address what was going on with immigration. So you now had Obama and Trump basically doing a series of executive orders. One of the most, really great ones was DACA under the Obama administration that helped a lot of Haitian children here. Okay, next slide. So it's interesting, Karen, that you talked about the author of Our Own Misfortune, because it goes on to talk about some of the concerns I've seen with immigration. A lot of times I just talked about all these great programs, all these wonderful legislation that's existed for Haitian. And believe it or not, we were expecting more Haitians to actually apply for TPS, more Haitians to apply for for HRFA. There was something called the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program back in the 1980s, and you had a lot of Haitians coming here on the Farm Worker Visa Program, and a lot of Haitians didn't apply for that. And so, again, the author of Our Own Misfortune, we sit back a lot of times. I ask clients, why are you not applying? Why didn't you apply for these programs? I mean, it was existed there. HRFA, there was a certain time period you needed to file that application. And a lot of times, they said like this, that they're afraid. They're suspicious of the government. They don't want to give their documents. And I'm astonished because then at this point, there was something that was existing for you. Go ahead. Yeah.
And those programs are managed by U.S. nonprofits, and how much of the publicity is made by U.S.
And that's an excellent point, which goes really to what Karen was talking about, And what I really want to discuss is how do we, as a collective group, really make these things known, right? There's all these amazing programs that are existent for Haitians, right? And even if it's not primarily designed for Haitians, like HRFA, but you have all these other, like the T visas. They were just talking about the trafficking bill that I had written. There's the T visas. You know how many Haitians come in here and basically they're trafficked in for labor purposes? Liste avec, you have those, and then we talk about the T visas, we talk about, the S visas. I used to work basically with the boats that were coming in, and there were so many people who witnessed, people dying or who were part of this criminal enterprise, and they worked with the government. Those individuals are eligible for S visas. And so,
Can you say what the T visa is?
The T visa is a trafficking visa, right? You need to be able to show that you were actually a victim of severe trafficking, right? And so a lot of people, when they come to me, they're talking to me about asylum, which is what they know, right? That's all they know. And then when they start telling me more details and I sit down with them, I see that they are eligible for the T visa, right? Some people are eligible for the U visa, which means that you're a victim of a crime. And, no one wants that, right? But the reality is that people are victims of crimes. And so they're eligible for the U visa. The S visa is almost like, we call it the snitch visa, right? And so, that's what I call it. I do criminal immigration, so I don't have this with Haitians, but criminal immigration, and a lot of times basically, if you are working with the government, if you are providing information to the government that's helping them with a criminal enterprise, then at that time you're eligible for this S visa. And like I said, I do criminal immigration. It's usually people who are drug traffickers, and then I'm able to get them the S visa. So that's where we go from there. I do want to talk about also naturalization and voting, because I think it's really important. Just like I said, there's a lot of Haitians not applying for, these programs. A lot of Haitians that do have their green card don't apply for naturalization. And that to me is lost power there, right? because it's lost power. And it and again speaks to Karen's point, the excellent point that she made, an author of our own misfortune, right? Because if you actually apply for citizenship, then you're able to vote. And that is how you have your voice heard, right? Your ability to be able, as a collective group. I want to talk about, and I think you could go to the next slide because it really talks about, next slide. Sure. Oh, we can go back.
Can we unpack why asylum applications
Oh, yeah.
are denied at the lowest rates more than any other?
We could be here for a while, but I won't do that because I think I have a time limit.
We didn't hear the question. She'll repeat it. Okay.
Yeah.
Number 3.
Right. Why is it that basically the asylum applications are denied at the lowest rates more than any other nationality? So that was actually through the Associated Press that I saw the statistic, and I believe it. I absolutely believe it. And I think the reality of the situation is because they're not represented correctly. I don't know how many times I've had Haitians come to me with asylum applications. By the time they get to me, they're in court, right? And just what, so by the, oh, denied at the highest rates. I'm sorry, more than any other nationality. I apologize. That was a mistake. Okay, so.
No, that's fine, but I saw what you really meant.
Okay. So let me address it. Okay, so let me answer it. So basically, you have Haitians coming to me sometimes, back in the day when I was in Miami, and even now to a certain extent, where they came in and I'm like, okay, so tell me about your asylum application. And they're like, well, ça dit su application. And then I'm like, but okay, do you know? And they didn't know. Or they would have a recording, and basically they would play for me. And so they had people that were actually notarios doing these asylum applications for them. The insanity of it is that some of them actually had really good asylum applications had they really sat with someone who was experienced and who would be able to help them. And that's the sadness of it.
May I add one thing?
Sure, please.
The one thing you mentioned before, they are economic.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we all know that we do not have a asylum for economic reasons.
Correct. And some of them are economic, but when they really actually, because there's different levels, there's different ways that you can actually get asylum. And so there are a lot of times when they're telling you about their story, and it takes time to sit down with someone. If you're doing it quick, you're not going to be able to get the story. But if you take your time, you will find an asylum application. You will find an asylum claim. Many of them have it. I have represented many women who were raped basically, and sometimes basically when you start delving into it, you see the politics in it. Because remember, rape is basically a weapon, that is used, in politics in certain countries, right? Like these third world countries like Haiti, etc. And how many times have I argued that and have been successful on that? Right? Because they were targeted because they were women, right? And because they possibly knew someone that was involved in politics and have been able to do it, right? And been successful in that many times.
Shannon,
Go ahead.
a notario in practicing immigration law are these offices that people would set up, Haitian Ovini, and they would literally, in our heyday, literally write one badly written anglais marron story on a paper and give it to 10 different people.
Oh, yeah.
And charge them 15. I literally was in immigration court with a client, and the judge looked at me and said, I read this exact same story from 3 other people this morning. So in terms of being the authors of our own misfortune, our own, okay, just setting up a business, taking the money, if you're gonna do it right. Right? But yes.
We're really short on time, but I want to underscore that by saying an Haiti gen notaire, and they have a role. So when you come and you see a notario or a notaire that says they're going to help you, you believe that because that's the system you come from, and you understand that this person has legal authority to do what they're doing.
And it's interesting because a lot of time, and let me tell you, that's an excellent point. But the reality is that there are nonprofit organizations. I used to work at FIAC, right? American.
I think that cost, I agree with her, that cost is
Of course.
I think that access to some of these agencies is another issue.
I agree.
Because they're not very easily accessible.
I think because they have long waiting lines. Yep.
So that must be realistic. And I also think that in terms of naturalization, you have, we need to deconstruct who we are as Haitians. Some folks cannot read or write, and there are no special provisions for them.
Unless they've had their green cards for over 15 years or over the age of 55. So there are exceptions to that. But then it comes down to information.
Exactly.
Correct.
And also cost, as she said, the notarios, and sometimes people, last week I spoke to a couple, they didn't know if the person was a real lawyer. And I said, if the company is called so-and-so multi-service, it ain't no lawyer.
Correct. Correct.
So they don't even know they do.
But then it comes down again to access to information and how we as a community, as a collective group, really basically advise these individuals the importance of basically having adequate, zealous representation. And again, I agree with you that you have these nonprofit organizations that are overwhelmed at this particular time. But even us as Haitian immigration attorneys, really providing pro bono services also. I mean, this is part of what we need to do for the bar anyway, and looking to do that as a group. So I think that's really important. So I think I'm out of time. So you guys,
we are almost out of time. We're gonna do question and answer after all of the speakers. So we'll have a mic. Everyone will get a chance to ask questions of all of the speakers that have gone today. So I'm gonna ask you to hold your questions so that we can get back on the program.
So quickly, I just want to say, because this is what, Karen had wanted me, and she addressed this also, really important to understand, because a lot of people will come to me and say like this, immigration. But there's the Department of Homeland Security, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services is under there. Where I go to court all the time is the Executive Office for Immigration Review, which is under Department of Justice. If you're going to be speaking, it's really important to know the difference between these entities, and you could certainly review that based on the fact that I'm running out of time. And we can go to the last slide. Okay. I think we addressed some of them, but I do want to talk about being a change maker, a decision maker. I think Karen kind of talked about that before, engaging in your community. And as people, Haitian brothers and sisters, I think it's really important for us to run for office, and also for us to basically work in some of these organizations, the immigration agencies, Citizenship and Immigration Services, the Department of State. It's important to have Haitians in these positions being able to really help you. I think it's so essential. Because when I am in court and I have someone that is Haitian, that is opposing counsel, to me it makes a difference, right? Because I'm able to communicate with them and understand. When I'm basically dealing with passport issues with Haitians and the officer is Haitian, makes a fundamental difference. And we really need to look at, not everybody has to be an attorney, right? Not everybody has to be a doctor or a nurse, etc., but certainly can work for these organizations and really be a change maker. And I think it's important that we really look at that and also look at running for office. All right, thank you.